College Football Playoff Committee just announced their third rankings. We're going to look back at an exciting weekend and talk about the rankings and the teams coming up next. Now we're going to start at number 11, Oregon State. The Beavers took Stanford out to the old woodshed. 62-17, I think, was the score of that one, and it wasn't even that close. This was a complete dominant performance by a really good Oregon State team. They run the football well. They pass the football well. They play very disciplined defense. This is a team that's 6 points away from being undefeated or having a chance to be undefeated. A bad loss to Wazoo, but Wazoo looked much better earlier in the season. That was at Wazoo. It's a tough place to play, so I don't blame them for that one. And then the 3-point loss, again, on the road at Arizona. Who can get mad about that? That loss gets better and better as each week goes by. Arizona is a really good football team. But Oregon State is going to have a lot to say about this playoff race. Even though they're coming in at number 11, we're talking about them because they host the Washington Huskies, who are number 5 in the poll. That's a little bit of a spoiler, but no big deal. We'll talk about the Huskies in a minute, but that matchup is going to be huge. All right, number 10 was Louisville. That's right. They looked pedestrian. Not going to lie, not going to sugarcoat it. That was a Thursday night game, and they did not look very good. They did find a way to come back in a game that looked, for all intent and purposes, that they were going to lose. The defense, I don't even want to knock the defense. The defense is probably one of the best parts about that team, but it sure did not look good in the first 3 quarters of that game against Virginia. There was an injury during that game, and I think that injury, it was pretty bad, but it changed the way that the game was flowing, and I think that kind of helped Louisville wake up. And so, but they're going to have to look a lot better if they're going to go on the road this weekend and beat a Miami team who's coming off a tough loss, had a tough call, and that's going to be everything Louisville wants and needs. So we're going to find out. Number 9, the Missouri Tigers. In the last 2 weeks, the Missouri Tigers have played Georgia and given them everything that they could handle. I think they lost 30-21. That was a incredibly competitive game. And look what Georgia did this week. I mean, they took Ole Miss, out to the deep end of the pool, we'll say. And then you look at also what Missouri did this weekend, and they beat the pants off of a really good Tennessee team, or a pretty good Tennessee team, we'll say. Missouri ranks number 18th in yards per play on offense. Their defense is, average, maybe a little bit above average, but they do make plays when they need to. And their only 2 losses are to LSU and Georgia, so those are 2 not bad losses. The LSU one maybe not as good as it once looked, but that's okay. So Missouri is your number 9 team. Number 8, Alabama. The Crimson Tide are rolling. That's right. They are peaking at the right time. They left no doubt against Kentucky. They have won the SEC West. There is absolutely going to be a lot on the line in Atlanta in a couple weeks. The Crimson Tide are literally peaking. They could not be peaking at a better time. Now, I know what everybody's saying. The Crimson Tide lost to Texas, and that's their natural ceiling. I get it. Looking at the way this is right now, I don't see any way in which, if they went out and Texas wins out, that Alabama doesn't jump Texas. I know down in Austin you guys don't want to hear that, but it just is what it is right now. Texas does not look nearly as good as that team that marched into Tuscaloosa and put a beating on those boys. But I tell you what, it's a long season. Teams get better, teams get worse. It's just what happens in football, and teams struggle down the stretch. Texas, they just lost their running back, and it's going to be a little bit of a tough road, I think. And I think if Alabama and Texas both went out, I don't see any way the Crimson Tide won't jump them, because they'll have had a win against, who it is, the 2-time defending champion Georgia Bulldogs. All right, number 7, the Texas Longhorns. As I just said, they lost their running back, Jonathan Brooks, and that is a huge blow to the Longhorns. Having a fantastic season, over 1,000 yards on the season, likely to be one of the top running backs taken in the NFL draft. And just, I think the speculation is now that he'll probably come back to Texas. But nonetheless, that is a tough one for the Longhorns. I'm not like dissing the Longhorns. I'm not mad at the Longhorns. Like, That win in Alabama still is sticking in my mind as well. But I think if I'm reading the tea leaves right, as this season goes, if Alabama goes and beats Georgia, I just don't see a way that the committee wouldn't put them in front of Texas. Because it's one thing, head-to-head is one thing, but that was a long time ago, beginning of the season, and Alabama doesn't look anything like the same team that was playing against Texas. Now, you could say that's because they were playing Texas, and that's a fair point. But they went down to USF and looked just as bad, if not worse, the following week. So that was, I think this Alabama team has turned the corner. I think they're a completely different team, and I think their play as recent has really shown that. All right, your number 6 team, the Oregon Ducks, unchanged. So here we go. The Ducks played USC in a game that, I guess, for lack of a better word, I mean, it's really hard to describe in one word. Let's just say it looked like a lion playing with their food, that was kind of bored. It was just complete. There was no question about who was going to win that game. It really was not that competitive as the score would say. But, they also showed kind of a Jekyll and Hyde and how good they can be, and then how they can have a lot of self-inflicting wounds with like 120 penalty yards, I think it was. There. Caleb Williams, I would not want to take anything away from him. He is nothing short of phenomenal, and his elusiveness in the pocket, it's just something that, I've never seen it before, and there's been a lot of good quarterbacks that have come before him, but he is absolutely special. And I think his size, helps, and the arm that he has, and it was amazing to me at how many throws that he could make, just scrambling out and just improvising, long ways down the field. So a little bit hats off to him, and a little bit of self-inflicted wounds for Oregon. But in general, I felt like they dominated that game. They still looked the part. Bo Nix passed for 4 touchdowns. They've got all of the pieces, and they look like a really good football team. Number 5, the Washington Huskies. I think the Huskies are, I'm going to say this right now, I think they are not getting the respect that they deserve from the committee. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I think they should be ranked ahead of Florida State. We'll talk about that in a minute when I give you my rankings. But as of right now, the Huskies, they did exactly what they needed to do, and that's what they do. They do just enough sometimes, and that can be infuriating. That can be frustrating. But look what the defense, they had a pick 6 essentially. That game was also a little more lopsided in the second half, I think, than the score. They had I can't remember the guy's name, but he dropped the ball at the 1-yard line. Would have been a pick 6, and then Utah recovered. Yada yada yada. Right? Like, I think the Huskies got a safety after that. But either way, still, the defense just shows up when it needs to, and so it's truly a bend but don't break. But I don't necessarily think that because of those performances against Utah is a good football team. I think they're probably looked at a little differently because of what Oregon did to them at Utah. I think some people might be having them lower ranked than they should be. I think if you looked at that, they would beat a lot of the teams ahead of them if they went head to head. So I think they're a good football team, and I think Washington's just not getting the credit they deserve. And you look at this. So they had a classic trap game the week before. I think that was the week before the Oregon game. They played Arizona. They went down to Arizona and Tucson, and they handled business. That game was a good game. That was a really good game, but Arizona was up. They had everything to play for, and the Huskies just went in there and they commanded the game from the start, and it was never really in peril. I think if you look back on that game, that's how good this Husky team is. They are phenomenal, especially when it's the game's on the line. They have a tendency to make plays when the game's on the line. And so they're going to be tested this weekend at Oregon State. We're going to talk about how we think that one's going to go. But I think the Huskies are a really good football team, and I think they're underrated by the committee. All right, the Florida State Seminoles are your number 4 team in the country. That's right. So holding serve there. I think I just said this. I think that Washington should be ranked in front of them. And for that matter, I think Washington should probably be ranked number 3. But Florida State comes in at number 4. And they won a rivalry game, okay? So I don't want to take anything away from Florida State. They won a rivalry game. It wasn't pretty. They got a very fortuitous call, one of the more head-scratching calls that I saw all season there right before halftime, even reviewed, and it was an obvious safety, but it wasn't called that way. And that's how the game goes. I'm not saying that they would have lost if it was for that, but that was certainly not an insignificant call in that game. I think they play really good defense, and I think the defense does kind of similar to Washington. It does what it needs to do when it needs to do it, and you could just see them kind of loosen up as that game went on. And so I think Florida State, if they can get everybody healthy and down the stretch, I think they're a really good football team. And I think obviously if they win out, they're going to be in the playoffs. Number 3, the Michigan Wolverines are your number 3 team. That's right. All they did was went into Happy Valley and dominated Penn State. And while this, I think, you could value this win. Some people are saying, oh, it's a great win. If you're a Michigan fan, you probably think it's better than it is. And if you're not a Michigan fan, you're probably not that impressed with it. I'm probably a little bit with the latter, that I was a little less impressed probably than more impressed. I think what it showed is that Michigan is for real. They can go into a really loud and raucous environment and win a football game and really dominate. This is another game that just, it felt like it was pretty one-sided. Michigan threw, I think, 8 passes. I think it was 8 passes they threw, and they were 7 for 8, and then they ran the ball the entire second half. And so they had 7 offensive linemen in some of those sets, and I have a couple different thoughts on that. Sometimes I think, that's a great strategy, and that's Harbaugh. That's a Stanford evolved Harbaugh, who would always have the big guys in their giant or jumbo package. And Michigan just said, hey, we're going to run the ball against this really good running defense. And I get what they were doing. They were going strength on strength, and they were, doing what they could. It was working, and they just committed to do that. And so hats off to the coordinators, hats off to Michigan. I think that game plan was good. Now, here's kind of the bad with that is I don't think Penn State's as good probably as everybody else thinks they are. I think their offense is abysmal. I'll just go ahead and say that. Evidenced by James Franklin firing their offensive coordinator. And so I just think that that you could overvalue that Penn State win. And I think that would be a mistake when evaluating this team. Now, again, any win in the Big Ten on the road in an environment like that is a good one. So hats off to Michigan. And they have a ton of distractions. They've got a lot of stuff going on with that program. So good on them to be able to kind of stay locked in. So if you're a Michigan fan, you got to be happy with that. And honestly, none of this talk means anything because the rubber is going to meet the road in 2 weeks when you play Ohio State. Number 2, Ohio State. That's right. The Buckeyes dropped to number 2, which means Georgia is your new number 1. But let's talk about Ohio State for a moment. That game was probably the most complete game the Buckeyes have played. And I know it's against Michigan State, but the defense is like a boa constrictor. It's just like they just squeeze the life out of you. They just they get their opponent and they just make them do things they're uncomfortable with, and they just get them out of rhythm, and they get to the quarterback. They cause turnovers. They just do everything that you would want an elite defense to do. Jim Knowles has absolutely turned that defense completely around. And so they're not so dependent on the offense now. Now, with Henderson in the game, they are a completely different team on offense as well. So with him back, we need to get a couple other pieces back over there for the Buckeyes, and they are a scary, scary team. Now they've got to prove all this, just as I said right before. They got to go to Ann Arbor, and they got to deal with Michigan, and we're going to see how much those signs really meant. If Michigan handles them similar to they did 2 years ago and last year, then maybe that didn't mean anything. But we will see when they go up, and this is probably the most anticipated one that I've ever had as far as Ohio State, Michigan, and there's been a lot of them. I just think this one has a lot of cool storylines for a lot of different reasons, and beyond the normal hate that you have for these two teams have for each other. The number 1 team, as I just mentioned, the Georgia Bulldogs. That's right, the Bulldogs, deserving of that spot. I'm fine with Ohio State or Georgia at that spot. I don't think there's a ton of separation between them. I think some people probably disagree with that. I think Ohio State's resume is still better. I think that Ohio State's defense is really good. I also think that Georgia's defense is really good, and the Missouri game certainly helps Georgia's case on top of what they did to Ole Miss on the field. And that was close for a while. It was like, oh, Lane's here. Lane's got this figured out. And then all of a sudden, no, the Bulldogs put everyone on notice that there's a reason they won 27 straight games and are 2-time defending national champions. So the Georgia Bulldogs, to me, are back at number 1, and they can stay there. Like I just said, Ohio State could be, up there as well. But like you would give this to Georgia because I feel like they've earned it. We're not supposed to look at, this season compared to last season shouldn't matter in this season. It's supposed to be in a vacuum, but it's not. And I've got no problem with Georgia being there. I think the performance like this is exactly what they needed. And having, Brock Bowers back, and then I think they're probably just a little bit complacent, and maybe that's what you saw throughout the middle of the season. I think that's just a product of winning so much over the last couple of years. But I think they're waking up and they're going to start peaking at the right time, and they know they've got a big-time showdown in 2 weeks against what's going to be a really motivated and physical Alabama team in the SEC Championship in Atlanta. So that is your number 1 team. All right, now this wouldn't be a Contender show without me giving my top 10 or 11 rankings. I think here's what I'll go with. I think Georgia 1, Ohio State 2. I got no problem there. I think Oregon's the 3rd best team in the country. They are going to have to show it against Washington. And if I were to say all these teams were to play is kind of how I'm ranking them, you'd have Washington or Alabama. Alabama would probably, I think pose a significant challenge to Washington, and that's because Washington's run defense is a little bit suspect, and Alabama runs the ball so incredibly well. So I would have Washington at 4, and then I would have Alabama at 5. I would have Michigan at 6, and people are going to scoff at that, but I'm going to tell you what, looking forward and watching Michigan, I didn't really think that they were as explosive on offense, and maybe that was just the way that they were approaching this, the game plan wise. But I felt like there was something missing from an elite football team. That's what I think, is the bigger picture and what I saw in Michigan personally. So I've got Michigan 6. I've got Florida State 7. Now Florida State, they're going to have something to say if they go and they get Louisville. So they got to root for Louisville this week against Miami. I'll let you know what we think is going to happen there. But Florida State, they could jump up. They could get healthy. There's some things that could change my opinion, for those guys. But as of right now, I've got them sitting at 7. I've got Texas at 8. I've got Oregon State at 9. And I'd probably put Missouri at 10 and Louisville at 11. And Louisville with a win against Miami this week, they would jump back up, I would think. I'm Josh Rodriguez for Sports Idol Nation. Sports is in our DNA. And I'd like to say thank you, and we will see you on Thursday, our show, the Prediction Show. Don't miss it. Again, drop a comment below, send us an email, and we would love to hear from you.